Yahya Jammeh, and that those who will be identified by the TRRC will face certain prosecution in the most serious form. There will be accountability of the highest order for these crimes, and I assure the victims that it is now only a question of when and not if. Make no mistake about it. Barring any findings or recommendations of the TRRC to the contrary, if former President Yahya Jammeh ever comes back to this country, he will face immediate arrest and charges of the most serious kind. He will be subjected to an accountability process like any ordinary accused person in this country, and no amount of irresponsible talk or political brinkmanship will prevent this from happening. Meanwhile, the government continues to demonstrate its commitment to the welfare of the victims by making an initial payment of $50 million to the TRRC Victims Trust Fund, part of which was used to provide overseas medical treatment for some victims. Nevertheless, great care must be taken not to undermine or be seen to undermine all the efforts invested in our transitional justice process. We have all worked too hard to throw it all away at the altar of political expediency. History will not judge us kindly if we engage in acts that undermine public confidence in these processes and ignore the pains and sufferings of the victims and their families. And let those who mock at or use threatening or abusive language against the victims be warned. Do not test the limits of our democratic tolerance or confuse our respect for the rule of law with weakness. We will not, under any circumstances, accept the intimidation or harassment of victims and witnesses by anyone. The change in December 2016 is as much about sensitivity to the plight of Jammeh's victims as it is about our collective destiny as a people. On the constitutional review process, we are pleased that the Constitutional Review Commission has now published its draft constitution for public reaction. It is indeed impressive that the CRC was able to produce this detailed draft in this short period of time. The publication of the draft has also achieved its intended purpose of generating public debate on the proposed governance architecture for our new Gambia. But unfortunately, and in spite of the many progressive provisions contained in the draft constitution, there has been too much focus on one or two issues that have threatened to overshadow all the good work of the CRC, and the tone of the exchanges has at times been regrettably unsavory. There is no doubt that the concerns of minorities must be taken into consideration as we seek to rebuild a new Gambia through assurances that make them feel protected by the state. How best to achieve that protection and assurance is the subject of intense debate these days. While the expression of divergent views is an intrinsic part of democracy and helps to bring to the fore issues that had simmered beneath the facade of peaceful coexistence in our country, so that we can address them openly and candidly as part of rebuilding the new Gambia, we must not allow these exchanges to divide us. Christians and Muslims have lived in this country in peace and harmony for generations, and it is the responsibility of each and every one of us to ensure that this fraternal spirit is jealously guarded. Now that former President Jammeh has gone, so must all his irresponsible actions that had divided us along sectarian lines. We must not allow his legacies to continue to threaten our cherished peace and tranquility. This country belongs to all of us, Christians and Muslims, and so it shall remain. Our democracy must not be allowed to become a tyranny of the majority. Mr. President, distinguished guests, one of the biggest challenges to our democratic reform process lies in our security sector reform. There is continuing mistrust between ordinary citizens and our men and women in uniform, in spite of the best efforts of individual law enforcement agencies to change their approach to law enforcement in the country. It is clear that there is an urgent need for a coordinated, efficient, and quick security reform process, and we urge the general public to exercise more patience and understanding, as this is a complex process that requires great care. But we must also recognize that a complete institutional transformation of our law enforcement agencies will require a longer and more focused effort, but we are determined to see this reform through. As chair of the steering committee of the security sector reform, I have extended an invitation to the United Nations to assist with coordinating all the different complementary efforts of our bilateral and multilateral friends and allies in this reform process, and we hope to see more progress in the course of this year. Mr. President, distinguished guests, in terms of legislative reforms, we have in the course of last year tabled for enactment before the National Assembly a number of transformative legislation, including an Access to Information Bill, an Anti-Corruption Commission Bill, a Women's Amendment of Discriminatory Laws Bill, a Sexual Offences Bill, and a Bill on Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters. More legislation will be tabled in the course of this year, including comprehensive amendments to the Criminal Code and Criminal Procedure Code in order to sanitize our criminal justice system and bring it in line with modern criminal justice norms and practices. In particular, the amendments will introduce non-custodial sentences such as community service, suspended sentences, probation, elimination of the death penalty as a sentencing option, greater flexibility for bail and plea bargaining, etc. Other new bills will include a prohibition of torture bill, which will criminalize acts of torture for the first time in the Gambia, an international crimes bill to cover mass atrocity crimes like genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, a media services bill, and amendments to the Elections Act in consultation with the Independent Electoral Commission and all registered political parties in the country. Mr. President, distinguished guests, we are also on course to regain and restore the Gambia's global leadership in human rights. Last year, the government initiated a case at the International Court of Justice against the Republic of Myanmar under the 1948 Genocide Convention. Perhaps this came as a surprise to many in and outside the Gambia, but keen followers of our progress since the change in December 2016 would have noticed that the ICJ case was not an isolated event. It follows a pattern of increasing commitment of the government for adherence to international law and the fulfillment of our obligations as a state party to both regional and international treaties and conventions. Barely 1 month after the installation of the new administration under His Excellency President Barrow, the government in February 2017 rescinded the decision by the Jammeh administration to withdraw the Gambia from the International Criminal Court, paving the way for our continued membership to the ICC. Since 2017, the government has signed and or ratified a number of international treaties, including the UN Convention Against Torture, the Optional Protocol on the Abolition of the Death Penalty, the UN Convention Against Enforced and Involuntary Disappearance, and the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Good Governance. Moreover, since 2017, the Gambia successfully submitted its combined periodic reports for the first time since 1985 to the UN Human Rights Council on the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, our combined periodic report for the first time since 1994 to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, our first report on the Maputo Protocol on the Rights of Women, and most recently in November 2019, we appeared before the UN Human Rights Council under the Universal Periodic Report procedure. More significantly, the Gambia had since October 2018 made a declaration pursuant to Article 34.6 of the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the establishment of an African court to allow individuals to have direct access to the court. Furthermore, the government has also honored all judgment awards made against the previous administration by the ECOWAS Court. Consequently, the Gambia's case at the ICJ should be viewed in the context of an increasing commitment to international law by the government. Moreover, by this single act of initiating a case at the ICJ under the 1948 Genocide Convention, we are saying to the rest of the world that the new Gambia will not tolerate oppression in or outside our borders.